On the morning of my wedding, I heard my fiancé say 6 words that shattered everything. Today we sign. She's just formality. He didn't know I was standing right behind the door. He didn't know I heard everything. He didn't know the woman in the white dress had stopped being naive a long time ago. By the time the guests raised their glasses, I had already changed the guest list. He thought he was marrying a bank account in heels. Instead, he watched me walk away, in silence. And he wasn't ready for what I did next. The sky was still pale when I opened my eyes. I'd barely slept, and maybe 2 hours, maybe less, but there was no weight of tiredness, just stillness, the kind your body carries when it already knows something your heart hasn't admitted yet. I sat up in bed, surrounded by soft ivory silk and 1,000 unspoken hopes. My wedding dress hung on the door, waiting, shoes perfectly placed, flowers chilling in the fridge. The house was full, laughter downstairs, the clatter of teacups, my best friend humming nervously. And still, I felt strangely alone. "Big day," someone whispered from the hallway. Laughter followed. My daughter Emily was somewhere down there arguing with the florist, probably. The cake had arrived early. The photographer too. I should have felt joy, excitement, butterflies. Instead, there was a hush inside me. Not fear, not dread, just quiet. I walked barefoot to the window and looked out. The sky was undecided, not sunny, not stormy. The kind of grey that holds its breath. I smiled to myself, 58 years old, and somehow, I still believed in love. Or I had, until this morning. Because hours before I would stand in front of our guests, before I would cancel everything in a dress I would never wear again. I overheard something that broke the spell completely. But before all of that, I was just a woman in love. Again. And if you had asked me then, standing in the soft light, sipping tea while my hair was curled and my nails were painted the palest pink, I would have told you this was the happiest day of my life. If only I had known what was about to happen. I wasn't always Helen the almost bride. Once I was Helen Richards, wife of Thomas Richards, the man I thought I'd grow old with, the man whose last name I kept out of habit more than affection. We met in college. Tom was charming in that quiet, careful way. He didn't pull you in like a storm. He drifted in like fog. I mistook that for mystery. It took me 15 years to realize fog only blurs the truth. We married young, had Emily 5 years later. She was bright and fierce from the beginning, tiny fists, loud lungs, eyes like mine. She gave our marriage purpose even when it stopped having rhythm. The truth is, Tom and I were never cruel to each other, just distant. That quiet kind of unraveling that doesn't rip, doesn't bleed, just wears thin like an old sweater you're too sentimental to throw away. He worked late. I stopped asking when he'd be home. We had separate accounts, separate friends, separate dreams, until one day we had separate lives. I found the emails on a Thursday. It always happens on a weekday, doesn't it? Never when you're ready, never with warning. Just a regular day. Laundry tumbling, soup on the stove, dog barking at the mailman, and suddenly your life splits open like a dropped plate. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look surprised. "You stopped seeing me," he said quietly, as if that excused everything. As if a man can vanish behind a laptop screen and still expect to be seen. We divorced 2 months later. He moved out, moved in with her, Angela, 29, ambitious, relentlessly kind in that condescending way some young women have with older men. Emily was 20 then, old enough to understand what happened, young enough to be angry at the wrong person. She chose him, not overtly. She still called, still came home on holidays. But something between us had shifted. An invisible tightrope I was expected to walk without shaking. She never said it, but I heard it anyway. "You should have tried harder. You should have held on." Held on to what? Silence? Loneliness? We've rebuilt, Emily and I, slowly, carefully. But it's not the same. It's measured now, polite. She speaks of her father fondly, calls Angela sweet, and I smile through clenched memories. Sometimes I wonder what she'd say if she knew the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what I did wrong, or if she ever realizes how much of myself I gave up trying to be a home for everyone else. But that's the thing about families. You build them brick by brick until one day you realize the house you're in doesn't feel like yours anymore. The first raindrop hit the porch rail at 9:17 a.m. Just one, light, hesitant, like the sky was second-guessing itself. Then another, and another, until the rhythm of drizzle painted the air with a soft, steady hum. It wasn't a storm, not yet. But the clouds hung heavy, grey and low like they were eavesdropping. Inside the house it smelled of roses and roasted vegetables. The caterer was setting up in the backyard under a white canopy that swayed gently in the breeze. Emily bustled from room to room, her heels clicking like a metronome, her hands full of ribbon, her mouth full of instructions. "Don't forget to chill the champagne," she reminded the bartender, for the third time. James hadn't come downstairs yet. That in itself wasn't unusual. James wasn't a morning person. He claimed his brain didn't start working until the second cup of coffee, and even then only under protest. But still, something about his absence felt heavier than oversleeping. Strange how quiet he is this morning, no? That was my neighbour, Margaret, peeking her head in through the back door like a curious cat. She'd been watching the activity from across the street with the kind of interest only retired teachers could muster. "You'd think the groom would be buzzing. He's probably just collecting his thoughts," I said, adjusting a floral centerpiece that didn't need adjusting. Margaret nodded, slowly. "Maybe, but a man gets married at nearly 60. He ought to be shouting it from the roof, don't you think?" I smiled. "Not with my mouth, with my training. That smile you put on when your stomach has questions but your brain isn't ready for answers." James's phone had buzzed earlier on the kitchen counter. Just once. A name I didn't recognize. A short message. I hadn't looked too closely. Hadn't wanted to. But now, the itch behind my ribs wouldn't quiet. The photographer arrived. Then the string quartet. Then the rain thickened, turning the backyard into a watercolour painting, all blur and movement. Guests began to arrive, umbrellas blooming like cautious flowers along the walkway. There were hugs and gasps and compliments. "You look radiant, Helen." But it all felt muffled, like I was underwater. Still no James. At 10:45, Emily came to me with a bouquet in one hand and concern in her eyes. "I think we should go check on him," she whispered. "He's not answering his door." And that's when it happened, when something inside me twisted. Not panic, not yet. Just the distinct bone-deep awareness that the day was shifting, that the story I thought I was living might not be the one unfolding. My phone buzzed again, a short, sharp vibration on the edge of the kitchen island where I'd left it among the empty coffee mugs and untouched toast. I wasn't going to check it, not today. Not with the florist running late and the band asking for an extension cord and my daughter looking at me like I might float away if she blinked too long. But something made me pick it up. Maybe it was the way the room felt suddenly colder, like a window had been left open somewhere inside me. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the kind of invisible nudge life gives you just before it shatters something you thought was solid. The message preview flashed across the screen. James D. "I'll be done with this circus by sunset. Meet me after?" My breath stopped. Just like that. Frozen mid-inhale, like my lungs had forgotten their job. The room didn't tilt, it didn't blur. It just paused. As if the whole house was listening for what I would do next. I opened the message, read it again. Done with this circus. I stared at those words until they lost shape, until the letters themselves felt foreign. Circus, sunset, meet me. Not I love you, not can't wait to see you. Not anything a man would text the woman he was about to marry. The message hadn't been meant for me. That much was obvious. My name wasn't there. No heart emoji. No typo or casual warmth. Just cold, efficient betrayal. I put the phone down. No dramatic gasp, no shattered glass, no tears. Just a quiet click as I set it back where I'd found it, right next to the jam-smeared butter knife and the wedding day timeline that suddenly meant nothing. The walls seemed closer now, the windows dimmer. Every sound, forks clinking, heels pacing, guests laughing, felt like noise in someone else's life. "Mom?" Emily's voice again, closer now. "Are you okay? You look pale." I turned to her, smiled the way mothers do when they don't want to frighten their children. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just needed a minute." But I wasn't fine, because in that moment I knew. I knew before the confrontation, before the lies, before the unraveling. I knew something was breaking. And not just a plan or a promise. It was the story I'd been telling myself. About second chances, about fresh starts, about being chosen this time for the right reasons. And I had a terrible, still growing feeling that I was about to find out just how wrong I'd been. I walked the hallway like a ghost in my own house, slow, careful, quiet in all the ways you learn to be when your heart is bracing for impact. The laughter had faded. The music from the quartet outside drifted in and out, soft as breath. And somewhere down the hall, James's voice rose like a thread being pulled loose. At first, I didn't mean to listen. I swear I didn't. I just paused. 1 foot from the study door, the air suddenly thick with something I couldn't name. That's when I heard him. "No, she has no idea," James said, voice low but unmistakably sharp. "This whole thing is locked in. By tonight, I'll be out from under it." My hand found the doorframe to steady myself. There was a silence, then a laugh. His laugh. Dry. Strained. "It's not like she's broke. She's got the house, the pension, Harold's investments. This is just a bridge. A smart one." Another pause. Then, "No, I don't feel bad. She's not a victim. She's a romantic. Big difference." My breath caught in my throat. A romantic. Like it was a flaw. Like it was a weakness to believe in good things again after everything I'd already survived. Like it was naive to want to be loved at nearly 60 without being reduced to a calculation. I took a step back. The floor creaked. My body froze. Inside the room, the silence changed. You can always hear when guilt walks into the conversation, even when it doesn't say a word. The door opened fast. James stood there, tie half knotted, phone still in hand. He blinked. Once. Then smiled. Thin as paper. "Helen, hey. I was just trying to get a hold of the car service. Everything okay?" I looked at him for a long second. Really looked. At the man I thought I knew. The man who brought me soup when I was sick and wrote me poems on napkins and kissed my hands like they were sacred. And all I could think was, what else was a lie? "I was just heading back," I said softly. Didn't mean to interrupt. I turned before he could say more. The rooms felt different now. Like they knew. Like the walls were holding their breath with me. I passed the mirror in the front hall and didn't recognize the woman in it. She looked older, smaller. But her eyes were awake. Whatever illusion I'd been holding on to of James, of love, of safety, had begun to splinter. And I wasn't sure yet if I was going to break with it, or finally let it fall apart. The zipper stuck for a second near my ribcage. Emily tugged it up with a frustrated little sound, then stepped back to admire her work. Her mother, dressed in cream lace and quiet resolve. She didn't know, not yet. She thought I was just nervous, maybe a little pale from the weather, or the pressure, or the 100 tiny things that can go wrong on a day like this. "You look beautiful," she whispered, eyes shining. I smiled, because I wanted to remember her that way. Before it all changed, downstairs the music had shifted. The quartet had started something soft and sentimental. Guests were taking their seats, the officiant was clearing his throat. And James? James was waiting, probably smoothing his tie in the mirror, rehearsing whatever performance he had planned. But I wouldn't be part of it. I walked down the staircase slowly, the dress whispering against each step. The hush fell even before I reached the last one, like the house itself knew what I was about to do. I stepped onto the makeshift aisle in the backyard, the canopy above fluttering, the chairs filled with people I knew, people I loved, people who had come to witness a beginning. I stopped at the front. James turned toward me, smiling. I didn't smile back. "There will be no wedding today," I said. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. My voice carried the way truth does. Heavy, certain, unshakable. For a moment, no one moved. Then came the sound I'll never forget. Chairs shifting, gasps sucked in too quickly, someone dropping a glass that shattered in the silence. Emily stood frozen at the edge of the garden, her mouth slightly open, a bouquet dangling at her side. James stepped forward, his face contorting into something between panic and confusion. "Helen, what are you doing?" I turned to the guests. "I know this is unexpected, and I know you've come a long way to celebrate with us, but I won't stand here and make vows to a man whose own promises were never real." Someone whispered, "Oh my God." "I'm not ashamed," I said, "but I won't be deceived. Not again." James opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "No explanations, not today, not in front of all these people who believed in something real." I took a slow breath, looking out at the stunned faces, the wilting flowers, the sky that couldn't decide whether to cry or clear. Then I turned, walked back up the aisle, past the cake, past the band, past the life I almost walked into blind. The dress trailed behind me like a curtain, closing on a story I refused to let define me. The dress hung over the back of the chair in my bedroom, its lace catching the late afternoon light like a net made to hold something delicate. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I went in. It looked different now, not ruined, not ugly, just stripped of the story I'd wrapped it in. I bought it believing in love again. I'd run my hands over the fabric in the boutique, tracing the scalloped edges, feeling the weight of the skirt. The seamstress had pinned it at my waist, her mouth full of pins, and said, "It's perfect for you." And I'd thought, yes, perfect for the woman who's survived, who's ready to be chosen for all the right reasons this time. Now it was just a dress. It didn't hold the promise of vows whispered under an arch of roses. It didn't carry the thrill of a second chance. It didn't even have the faint trace of perfume from a day that never happened. It was clean, untouched, like the ceremony had been nothing more than a dream I'd half woken from. I lifted it gently, pressing the fabric to my cheek. It was cool, soft, and in some strange way, it comforted me. Not because of what it meant before, but because of what it meant now. This dress would never see me stand across from a man who had already decided what I was worth. It would never watch me nod through vows I didn't know were lies. It would never be part of a performance I didn't audition for. It was the dress I never wore, and in not wearing it, I'd kept something for myself. People think wedding dresses are about beauty, about fantasy, but really they're about transformation. You put one on, and you tell the world, "This is the moment I become someone's wife." I had thought I was ready for that again. What I didn't realize was I was already transformed, not into someone's wife, into my own keeper. I folded it carefully, not out of sadness but respect, for the me who had dared to hope, for the me who had believed, and for the me who now understood that some things are worth keeping, even if they never serve their original purpose. Maybe I'd donate it someday. Maybe it would hang there until dust softened the lace. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd wear it for myself one quiet afternoon, barefoot in my kitchen, dancing to a song only I could hear. Not as a bride, but as a woman who had finally learned the difference between being chosen and choosing herself. Emily didn't come home with me after the wedding fell apart. She left in someone else's car, barely saying goodbye. I watched her from the porch, still in my dress, makeup smudged, hands trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion, as she climbed into the back seat without even looking over her shoulder. It wasn't until the next morning that she showed up. No knock. Just the sound of the front door creaking open and her heels clicking angrily across the hardwood like punctuation. She found me at the kitchen table, still in my robe, a cup of tea long gone cold between my palms. "You embarrassed me," she said, arms crossed so tight they looked like armor. I looked up at her slowly. "Good morning to you, too." "I'm serious." Her voice cracked like a whip, sharp, immediate. "You could have handled it privately. You didn't have to make a scene." I sat there a moment, letting her words settle like dust. Then I said, "It wasn't a scene, Emily. It was the truth, spoken out loud." She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it, the anger, the confusion, but underneath it all, the hurt, that old, aching kind of hurt you don't know what to do with, so you throw it like a stone. "Everyone was watching," she said more quietly. "Yes," I nodded. "And maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Maybe some truths should be seen." She dropped into the chair across from me, her face suddenly soft, uncertain. "I didn't know about the message, or what he said." "I didn't know. I never said you did. But you think I should have, that I should have seen it coming." "No," I said gently. "I think you wanted it to work for me so badly you stopped looking too closely." Her eyes, my eyes really filled with something that wasn't quite tears, just weight. "You were happy, Mum. Happier than I've seen you in years. I wanted that for you." "I wanted it too," I whispered. "But wanting something doesn't make it real." She picked at the hem of her sleeve, her voice smaller now. I didn't expect you to walk away. Not like that. You always stayed. With Dad, with everything." I reached across the table, took her hand. "Maybe that's the problem, Emily. I taught you to stay too long, even when it hurts. Maybe now it's time I teach you how to leave." She didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. We sat there, two women with the same eyes, learning in real time that bravery looks different when it's quiet. And sometimes, disappointment is just love in disguise, trying to protect what's left. I met James at the pharmacy of all places, standing in the aisle between cough drops and multivitamins, arguing with the self-checkout machine like it had personally insulted him. He looked up, caught me watching, and grinned like he wasn't the least bit embarrassed. "Technology hates charm," he said, as if that explained everything. I laughed. Too easily, maybe. It had been a long time since anyone made me laugh without trying. He asked if I knew how to work the machine. I showed him. He asked if I liked coffee. I said yes. That night, we sat in a booth with chipped vinyl seats, sharing a slice of lemon pie and stories we'd only ever told our pillows. He listened. Really listened. That's what caught me. Not his smile, not his confidence, but the way he made space for my words. And God, I was hungry for space. After Harold, after the divorce, after the silence that came from being no longer someone's wife, no longer someone's priority, I had started to wonder if maybe that was it. Maybe my story had already peaked, and the rest was just filler. Then came James, with his warm eyes and easy stories and the uncanny ability to remember the way I took my tea. He didn't sweep me off my feet. He pulled me gently, inch by inch, back into the idea that I might still be lovable, wanted, needed. And that, I now see, was the trap. Because what I mistook for love was need. His need for security, my need for reassurance. We met in our loneliness and mistook the absence of pain for the presence of something real. I told myself it was different this time. that I wasn't ignoring red flags. I was just choosing grace. That little voice, the one that hesitated when he changed the subject too quickly, when he dismissed questions with a joke, when he forgot to mention a business trip until the day before, it was there, whispering. But I buried it beneath gratitude, because sometimes comfort masquerades as trust. And if you've been alone long enough, you'll start to call anything gentle love just to give it a name. Looking back, I don't think James ever really lied to me. He just let me believe what I needed to believe. And I let him. Because when you've spent years surviving, you forget to ask whether what you're being given is real, or just the softest version of being used. The makeup had smudged beneath my eyes, black half-moons where mascara had mingled with sweat and grief. My lipstick had faded, leaving only a ghost of colour at the edges of my mouth. I stood in the bathroom, the silence thick, the mirror fogged from the shower I hadn't taken. At first, I didn't recognise the woman staring back at me, not because she was broken, but because she wasn't. She looked tired, yes. She looked like someone who had carried too much hope on a fragile frame. But her eyes, those tired, familiar eyes, were clear, steady, awake in a way they hadn't been for years. For so long, I had clung to the idea that love would come back if I just waited quietly, that if I softened enough, smiled enough, gave enough, eventually someone would stay. But that morning, with the hem of a wedding dress trailing on the cold tile floor and the taste of betrayal still bitter in my throat, I saw the truth. I didn't lose love. I lost an illusion I had helped build brick by brick out of every moment I looked away from my instincts, every time I accepted less, every time I confused attention for affection, charm for character, comfort for connection. The woman in the mirror, she wasn't a fool. She wasn't pitiful. She was someone who had loved deeply, hoped honestly, and stood still for far too long in rooms where her presence was taken for granted. And now she was done waiting to be chosen. I reached up and wiped the mascara from under my eyes. It left a faint shadow like smoke after a fire. I didn't mind. Let it show. Let the next version of me carry the marks of what she learned. I brushed my hair back, slowly. The strands had loosened from their pins hours ago, falling like a story that had finally unravelled. I let them fall. Outside, I could hear the faint rustle of wind through the trees, distant voices, neighbours maybe, life continuing without ceremony, without fanfare. And inside, I stood quietly, shoulders straightening, breath deepening. This was not the end. Not of love. Not of hope. Not of me. It was the shedding of a skin that no longer fit. I touched the mirror, fingers cool against glass, and whispered to the reflection. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. Then I turned off the light and walked out of the room, barefoot, unbridled, and finally, becoming. It was nearly 9 p.m. when I heard the knock. Not the kind of knock that demands attention, not frantic, not desperate, just steady, like someone who wasn't sure they should be there but had come anyway. I opened the door and froze. Thomas Richards stood on my porch, hands in his coat pockets, hair greyer than I remembered, eyes softer than they had any right to be. For a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming. Maybe the day had finally tipped into madness. Tom, I said, too stunned to mask the disbelief, what are you doing here? He gave me a small shrug, the kind he used to give when he didn't know how to say something properly. Emily called me. Of course she did. She didn't say much, just that the wedding was off, that you were hurt. I stepped aside wordlessly, letting him in. The house still smelled faintly of flowers and disappointment. He looked around, at the empty champagne flutes on the sideboard, the untouched cake boxed in the fridge, the dress still draped over the armchair like a ghost. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, as if all of it confirmed what he already knew. I'm not here to judge, he said quietly. I didn't come to fix anything. Then why are you here? He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something behind his eyes that wasn't defensiveness or detachment. It was regret, pure and plain. Because I never told you the truth, he said. Not the whole of it. I crossed my arms, bracing. About what? About why I left. Why I drifted away. It wasn't Angela. It wasn't some grand love story. It was me, not knowing how to be a man who stayed. And you. He paused, voice catching. You were too good to settle for a man who was half present. I stared at him. I didn't know what to say. All the things I had screamed into pillows or swallowed in silence. And now here he was, decades too late. You deserved better, Helen, he said. You always did. I just didn't have the courage to say it out loud. A silence settled between us, heavy but not hostile, almost clean. I'm not asking for anything, he added. I just didn't want you to go through another heartbreak thinking you were unlovable. Because you're not. You never were. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. And for once, Thomas Richards didn't try to hug me. He didn't try to make it about us. He just tipped his head, turned toward the door, and left the way he came. Quiet, simple, honest, and, strangely, healing. It was 2 days later when Emily came back. She didn't knock this time either. Just walked in, like she used to when she was still in high school, flustered and flushed from whatever drama had chased her home. Only now, the drama wasn't about a failed test or a boy who didn't call. It was about something deeper, something that had settled into her bones. I was in the garden, pulling up the last of the summer basil. I heard her footsteps behind me, hesitant, almost childlike. I need to tell you something, she said. I didn't turn around. You can. She hesitated, then sat down on the stone bench near the hydrangeas, the same one where she used to sit with her lemonade and tell me about everything and nothing. I heard James on the phone, she said quietly. 3 weeks before the wedding. I turned to face her then, slow, steady. I was upstairs. I wasn't trying to listen, she added quickly. But he was talking to someone, laughing, actually. Said something about how this would solve everything for now, and that Helen's too hopeful to notice. I didn't know what he meant, not exactly. Why didn't you tell me? She looked down at her hands. Because I didn't want it to be true. And because you were happy, Mom. I haven't seen you that happy in a long time. I thought, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it didn't mean anything. I sat on the edge of the raised bed, dirt still under my nails. But you doubted him, she nodded. Yes, and I ignored it. I told myself I was being protective, or paranoid, or just bitter after watching what you went through with Dad. I took a breath, felt it catch somewhere behind my ribs. You protected my happiness, at the cost of my trust. Emily blinked hard. I know, and I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about what it would feel like for you if it all fell apart. I was thinking about what it would mean if I was right. There it was, the ugly truth. She hadn't told me because she didn't want to carry the weight of being the one who pulled the thread. She had chosen silence, like so many of us do, because silence is cleaner than confrontation. Until it's not. I would have listened, I said softly. I wasn't brave enough to speak, she whispered. We sat in the garden, 2 women bound by blood and silence, and somewhere between the confession and the forgiveness that hadn't quite arrived, I realized something. Love is complicated, but truth, even painful truth, has a weight we can carry together, once we finally stop carrying it alone. The house was finally quiet. The flowers had wilted. The candles had burned down to stubby wax ghosts. The champagne flutes stood in neat, untouched rows, like they were waiting for a celebration that never came. Everyone had gone, except for Sarah. I found her sitting on my back porch in one of the old wicker chairs, a wool shawl draped over her shoulders, a glass of something dark and slow in her hand. She didn't look up when I stepped outside, just kept rocking gently. eyes on the dusky sky, the way you do when you've seen enough life to know rushing it never helps. "I didn't realize you were still here," I said softly. Sarah glanced over. "Didn't want to leave until you sat down." I lowered myself into the chair beside her. My body ached, not from effort but from emotion. Grief leaves a strange sort of soreness, doesn't it? She handed me the second glass. "It's whiskey, the good kind." Seemed like a good kind of whiskey kind of day. I took it without question, sipped. It burned a little, but in the comforting way, like something waking up inside. Sarah smiled. "You remind me of myself at 58. I turned to her. "Oh?" "I didn't walk away when I should have," she said simply. "I had all the signs, all the whispers. I even caught him once, not quite in the act, but close enough. And still, I stayed. I told myself I'd be a fool to start over, that it was too late." She paused. "It's never too late, Helen." I stared out at the garden. "Sometimes it feels like I waited too long to get brave." Sarah shook her head. "No, you got brave exactly when it mattered most." We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that holds rather than isolates. Crickets began their song in the hedges. A breeze lifted a petal off the table and carried it gently to the ground. "I keep wondering," I said, "what people will say, what they'll think of me." Sarah leaned back. "Let them think what they want. You didn't lose your mind. You found your boundaries." I looked at her then, this woman who had lived on my street for 20 years and yet, somehow, I'd never truly seen until now. She raised her glass slightly. "To every woman who says no a little later than she should have, but still says it." I clinked mine against hers, and in that quiet, whiskey-warmed moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Not vindicated, not victorious. Just understood. People kept asking if I cried, as if the answer would tell them everything they needed to know about the depth of my heartbreak, or the size of my wound, or the strength I did or didn't have. I could see it in their eyes. Some part of them wanted me to say yes, that I wept, that I collapsed in the bathroom, that I screamed into pillows and cursed the sky. But I didn't. Not that day. Not when I read the message. Not when I heard James call our wedding a bridge. Not when I stood in front of my friends and family and said the words no bride plans to say. There were no tears, and it wasn't because I wasn't hurt. God, I was. The kind of hurt that moves in slow and quiet like fog settling into your lungs, but even as it settled, even as it pressed against my ribs, I didn't cry, because something deeper than sadness had taken root. Clarity. I think people expect tears when something ends, but I didn't lose love that day. I lost the illusion of it. And I've cried enough in my life for things that weren't real. I wasn't about to cry for a man who looked me in the eyes every morning and still kept a secret behind his smile. I'll cry for love, but I won't cry for lies. And this was a lie dressed in hope, packaged in warmth, tied up with just enough sweetness to make me believe again. I'll grieve the part of me that wanted so badly for it to be true, but I won't mourn what was never mine to begin with. Some people say not crying is a sign of shock. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Maybe it was knowing, truly knowing, that I had saved myself. I could have walked down that aisle. I could have played the part. Smiled through the ceremony, cut the cake, danced to the music, laughed on cue. And then lived with the slow, aching knowledge that I'd said I do to someone who already hadn't. But I didn't. I stood still. I listened to my gut. I spoke the truth. And I walked away before the damage could settle too deep. So no, I didn't cry that day. Because the woman who needed someone to love her at any cost, she's not here anymore. And the woman who stood in her place had just found something far more sacred than romance. She found her voice. The morning after Sarah left, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, my laptop open, and a yellow legal pad covered in names, numbers, and crossed-out intentions. It wasn't revenge. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was clear. There's something oddly liberating about realizing how much of your life was built around being useful. How many relationships were held together by your reliability, your generosity, your willingness to say yes even when your heart whispered no. That morning, I started saying no. I began with my will. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and lemon polish. I told him I wanted to make some changes. He asked if anything specific had happened. I looked him straight in the eye and said, I woke up. I removed James entirely. He hadn't been in the original draft, but I had scribbled notes, little future hopes. They were gone now. I rewrote the beneficiary list. I added causes that mattered to me, the women's shelter in town, the library I once volunteered at, the animal rescue where I got my cat. I included Emily, of course, but not in the way she might have expected. I left her a letter with my wishes, my memories, and one final reminder that love should never come with a ledger. Then came the bank accounts. I changed the passwords, closed the joint savings James and I had started just for wedding costs, and opened a new account in my name only. I called the financial advisor I'd been avoiding since Harold passed and asked him to walk me through every single asset I had, what was protected, what was exposed. By lunch, I knew exactly what was mine. And by dinner, I had claimed it. There's a quiet power in reclaiming your autonomy. Not out of bitterness, but out of truth. Because if they only loved me when I was useful, when I was the one covering, fixing, financing, organizing, then they never really loved me. They loved what I gave. They loved the ease I offered, the scaffolding I provided for their lives. But I'm not scaffolding. I'm not a bridge. I'm not a retirement plan. I'm not a safety net wrapped in lipstick and good intentions. I'm a woman. With history, with agency, with value that doesn't depreciate just because someone else failed to see it. I looked at the final page of my new will and I signed my name slowly, carefully, like a woman who knows exactly what it means to leave behind a legacy built not on fear, but on freedom. It wasn't the wedding that unraveled me. It was the quiet after. The silence that followed the cancelled vows, the returned rentals, the phone calls that stopped coming once the spectacle was over. And in that silence, I realized it was never about the wedding. It was about who I had allowed to pull up a chair at my table. The table I'd spent years setting, adding extra plates, scooting over, making room for people who brought empty hands and heavy expectations. People I kept close out of fear, out of habit, out of the aching hope that if I gave enough, stayed soft enough, smiled long enough, they'd choose to stay for me. Not just what I gave them. But the truth is, I had invited many who were only there for the feast, not the host. So I started over. Not with a wedding, but with a dinner. It was simple. A small roast chicken, roasted vegetables from my garden. A bottle of red I'd been saving for some imagined special occasion. Candles. Not fancy ones, just enough to cast a gentle glow, the kind of light that doesn't flatter. It tells the truth. I invited 4 people. Not because I couldn't have filled the room, but because I wanted the table to feel honest. Sarah came, of course, with her quiet presence and that bottle of whiskey she'd promised to finish with me someday. Harriet, my friend of 15 years and the sharpest mind I've ever met, brought a lemon tart and a wicked grin. Angela from the shelter, a woman half my age but twice as brave, whose laugh fills every corner of a room. And Emily. Yes, Emily. Because despite the silence, the missed warnings, the mistakes, we were still tethered. And this time, I wanted her to see how it could be, how trust looks when it's not leveraged but earned. We sat around that table for hours, eating, talking, passing stories like side dishes. There was no small talk, no pretending, just truth, softened by laughter, warmed by forgiveness, spiced with the kind of honesty I'd once been afraid to serve. I looked around and felt, for the first time in years, full. Not just from the food, but from the company, the connection, the quiet knowing that I had finally stopped begging for a place in someone else's life and started choosing who belonged in mine. This wasn't a dinner party. It was a declaration. This is my table. These are my people. And from now on, only those who bring love, not conditions, get a seat. Dear James, you'll never read this. That's the point. I'm not writing to change your mind. I'm not writing to spark guilt or invite apology. I'm writing this because there are things I need to say, not for you to hear, but for me to finally let go. You made me question my worth. That's the line that's been stuck in my throat. The truth of it tastes metallic, like blood from a bite too long ignored. You didn't insult me outright. You didn't shout. You didn't raise a hand or even a voice. No, you did something quieter. You made your love conditional. You smiled with your mouth full of secrets. You kissed me with one eye on the exit. And I let it happen. I let it happen because I wanted to believe. In second chances. In the idea that love could arrive late and still be real. I wanted to believe that someone could see me, not for what I could offer, not for the house or the pension or the comforting routine I brought, but for the woman I am when the makeup's off and the silence settles. I hoped you'd be that person. You weren't. But here's what you didn't count on, James. You didn't count on me choosing myself. You didn't count on me standing in front of 100 people and saying no, with my dress still on and my heart still shaking. You didn't count on me walking away, not broken, but wide awake. And here's the part I wish you could read. I found my worth. Right here. In the wreckage you left behind. I found it not in someone else's arms, not in another promise, but in the mirror. In the voice I finally stopped silencing. In the calm that settled the moment I stopped begging to be enough. I am enough. I always was. You just weren't looking for love. You were looking for shelter. And I? I was tired of playing house for men who didn't want a home, only a landing place until the next leap. So this letter goes nowhere. It lives in my drawer between grocery lists and old poems, a page of goodbye that doesn't need postage. Not all closure comes with answers. Sometimes it comes with a pen, a truth you finally admit to yourself, and the quiet power of writing it down and walking away. Helen. They say anniversaries are for marking love, for lighting candles and clinking glasses over shared memories. But this year, I lit a single candle for myself. No cake, no groom, no toasts about forever. Just me, 3 close friends, and a table set with laughter. It's been a month since the wedding that wasn't. The invitations had been printed, the dress tailored, the florist paid in full. I'd bought rose-scented candles in bulk and learned how to fold linen napkins into little swans. And yet none of that made me feel as alive, as grounded as this small dinner tonight. This is my real anniversary, I said, raising my glass. Not of heartbreak, but of clarity. Theta leaned across the table, her wine glass catching the light. You mean the day you called off a wedding in front of 75 people and made it look like a TED talk? We burst out laughing. The kind of laughter that starts in the throat and ends in the belly, unburdened. I hadn't laughed like that in years. I mean the day I chose myself, I said, softer now. Really chose. Without compromise. There's a particular silence that follows truth. Not awkward, just full. We sat in it for a moment, each of us chewing on the words, tasting what it might mean in our own lives. Choosing yourself, not in theory but in practice, in real, uncomfortable action. I looked around at the women who stayed after the storm, Theta who showed up with tissues and tequila the night everything unravelled. Harriet who rewrote my will with a grin that could slice steel. And Dana, my neighbour who once lent me sugar and ended up lending me her heart. Not one of them had asked me why I didn't try harder to fix it. Not one had said, "Maybe you misunderstood." Instead, they'd said, "You were right to leave." That night, we drank Prosecco and ate too many stuffed mushrooms. We danced barefoot in my living room to 70s music, laughed until my sides hurt, and cried when no one was looking. There was no groom, no bouquet toss, no awkward speeches about compromise and partnership. Just four women who had lived long enough to know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no. And as I blew out the candle at the end of the night, one small flame flickering in a clean, quiet house, I made a silent wish. Not for love, not anymore. For truth, for peace, for the strength to keep choosing myself, even when it's hard, even when it's quiet. Especially then. Happy anniversary, Helen. The flowers were waiting on my porch, soft yellow tulips in a mason jar, the kind you pick rather than order. There was no knock, no dramatic entrance, no forced smile at the door. Just the quiet rustle of petals in the breeze and a folded note tucked beneath the jar, weighed down by a small, smooth stone. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Emily's, slanted, rushed, as if she hadn't quite decided whether to write the note at all. I picked it up slowly, my heart bracing itself. Maybe strength is inherited. 6 words, that was it. No apology, no defense, no tear-stained explanation. Just 6 simple words, but they landed like a balm. I sat down on the porch steps, the jar of tulips beside me. Yellow. Not red, not white, not romantic or ceremonial. Yellow like light, like hope. It had been weeks since we'd last spoken, really spoken. After the wedding fell apart, there had been tension, distance. She was angry, yes, confused. Embarrassed by the scene I'd made, she said. Hurt that I hadn't warned her, included her more. But I knew beneath it all there was shame, not at me, at herself. I didn't expect her to understand right away. I had carried her through the world since she first breathed, protected her from harsh truths when I could. And now the truth had arrived anyway. Messy, public, undeniable. Her silence since that day had been louder than any scream. But this was different. This was a thread. Maybe strength is inherited. Maybe she saw now that saying no isn't weakness, that leaving isn't failure, that boundaries are not a betrayal. They're a form of love, too. I thought about her life, her choices, the men she'd dated, the jobs she'd stayed too long in, the way she folded into herself to avoid conflict just like I used to. Maybe she saw in me what she hadn't yet found in herself. And maybe now, just maybe, she was starting to try. The note didn't ask for anything. It didn't offer anything either. But it gave me something I hadn't realized I still needed. Recognition. Later that evening, I moved the tulips to my kitchen table, right next to the cake stand where I now kept fresh fruit and new recipes in progress. And I smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because something had begun. My daughter hadn't said, "I'm sorry." She had said in her own way, "I see you," and for now, that was more than enough. The toast popped up just as the kettle began to whistle, a small domestic symphony that somehow felt like a celebration. I buttered the bread slowly, added a little apricot jam, and poured the hot water over loose-leaf tea I'd bought last week just because the label said, "brings clarity." I hadn't believed it, but now watching the steam curl into the quiet of my kitchen, I wondered if maybe the tea had kept its promise after all. It was morning, just another morning, and yet, not at all. No ring on my finger, no ceremony to prepare for, no apologies to write, no one waiting in the other room. The house was still but not lonely. For the first time in years, the silence felt like space, not absence. I sat by the window, the one that faces east, where the morning sun finds its way through the leaves of the old dogwood tree. The light was soft today, forgiving. Not a spotlight, not a glare, just a quiet acknowledgement that a new day had begun. I had always thought happiness would come wrapped in someone else's voice, someone else's hands, someone else's plans for the future. For so long, I'd chased the idea that partnership was the reward for surviving everything I'd endured, that if I was good enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, love would arrive, dressed in vows and breakfasts for two. But here's what I've learned. Love isn't always what saves you. Sometimes it's what distracts you from saving yourself. And the life I thought I was waiting for, the life I thought would begin once someone chose me, had been waiting for me to choose it. I looked around the room. The vase of tulips from Emily, a watercolour painting I'd finished last week, the sourdough starter I'd finally kept alive on my 4th attempt, my world small and full and entirely mine. There was no music playing, but I hummed anyway, and I said out loud, just to hear it, turns out I was the home I was looking for. It didn't echo. It landed. I took a bite of toast. The jam was sweet, a little tart, exactly how I liked it. Outside, the day was waking up slowly. I had no plans, no script to follow, just a long walk in mind, maybe a new recipe to try, and a dozen quiet things that made my life feel whole. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined, but it was finally the beginning I deserved. What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.